5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to The Hoon, where co-host Peter Bale and I go around the week's news in geopolitics and Aotearoa's political economy with a whole bunch of experts, academics and politicians, all to understand our worlds better and have some fun.
Jesus, our producer Bernard's been getting on with it. This is fantastic.
I know. This is amazing. We are lifting the quality of the show here on The Hoon. It's great to see.
Trying to. Well, it also sounds like the intro music to some sort of murder mystery podcast. So we're going to have to do some true crime work here and find out who's been shooting the tuis on Waiheke or whatever.
Yeah. No, well, hopefully it's not live true crime. That's not what we wanted to do.
No. Well, in your house, anything's possible.
Yeah, it's going to be quite a show because we're going to have Josie Pagani and Robert Patman on early today together from 5:20. We've also got.
What's going to happen is that if we're not careful, they're going to spin off and run their own bloody podcast. We're going to spawn their podcast. It'll be like bloody, Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart. They'll just spin off their own podcast.
It's
That's
like
true.
all those spin-offs
That's true.
from Friends. They never really worked, did they?
Can I just tell you, I'm one of those people who I don't think I've ever watched an episode of Friends, certainly not from start to finish.
Yeah, I got into it, particularly with my daughters. They really enjoyed it, and they're only in their 20s, and there's a whole sort of second wave of fans of it.
Yeah. No, I know, particularly since what's his name died. Yeah.
So no, I think this is the original, the goat as they call it.
I think it's a little we should do a goat podcast, actually, not literally about goats, but about the greatest things of all time, whatever they are. But I think we have some way to go to make this into a goat podcast, Bernard. I mean, I'm very grateful to our audience, and of course we have a poll to ask our audience because you're going to do it anyway, I know. But do you want to ask the audience about the thing that you're suggesting?
Yes, in the spirit of RMA consultation, I am really keen to record The Hoon, to have it live on a Thursday at 5 o'clock instead of a Friday. I think that the work week is being pulled forward, and also
your work week or everybody else's?
Everyone else's. This is my contention. Certainly for people working in offices these days, they often don't come in for the Friday. You often see them on the Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday now. And also, I am very keen to stop sending people emails on weekends. I'd also like to sleep in on Saturday. And so.
But Bernard, how are you going to maintain the kaka as a sort of hot news thing? You're going to have to delegate it to me for those hours when you're not. Not awake.
You can have it if you like.
David says Thursday is better for me, so better for him. David Mooring says Thursday is better for him, so let's keep it on Friday.
No,
I'm kidding.
very keen to keep it on Thursday. So I'll make sure everyone gets plenty of notice. And of course, it means too that we'll be able to have the recorded version of The Hoon out on a Friday morning. So a bit more time on Fridays and Saturdays for people to listen to it. And I hear often from people when I do get it out a little bit late on a Saturday or even shockingly a Sunday, a lot of people complain, hey, that was my Saturday morning walk. Well, we'll make sure it's out in time for maybe have a walk on a Friday.
Oh, good. Well. Several people are saying Thursday is better for them. Well, that's good. I just worry sometimes that it might end up that the three of us have a sort of 3-day weekend, and that I go off fishing on Friday mornings instead of reading 63 items of news, so that I'm up with the news for the Hoon at 5 o'clock on a Friday evening.
The whole four day work week is a real thing. It is making us all healthier and more productive, it seems.
Yeah.
And I'm keen to try to do that.
I'm heading very fast towards a no-day work week, which is slightly worrying. I'm hoping that somebody's going to give me a universal basic income soon, or a universal bail income, as I see it myself.
Oh yes, very good. No, certainly, I'm keen to do that, and I appreciate the support of all of the subscribers I've sort of floated it with subscribers this morning in
Oh,
the
have
full
you? Good.
course, and I got some great feedback, and I really appreciate it. I work pretty hard, and I'm really glad that I can maybe take a few hours off on a Friday too. So
Oh, this is
that's
good. We're
good.
getting lots of people on YouTube saying that they endorse that. That's fantastic.
Oh,
And Bernard,
thank you.
did a little Bernard Hickey this morning. I got up at 3 o'clock in the morning to do a 2.5 hour, 3 hour webinar with a whole bunch of people, including the new chief executive of the Washington Post, at three
Ah,
o'clock to 6:30 this morning. So I now know how you live, or you know.
mm.
But I tell you what,
Well,
in
one
order
of the
to do
great
it, I have to go to bed pretty bloody early the night before.
yeah. Yeah, no, well, I've worked out that I can, if I have a little snooze in the middle of the day, an hour or so, that helps. And just getting to bed early. Maybe as I get older and less social, I'm tending to
Do you
focus on,
think we need to?
just
Do you think we need to add a sort of middle-aged men give you their life tips for fitness? You know how I turned my sagging belly into a six pack, or used a six pack to turn my
yeah. Well, we'd
turn
have
my
to.
belly into a sagging one.
Yeah, no, I think not. It's the short answer because we'd have to have done it, and I don't think we have. But we will work on it.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I'm
this
sure
week
you
it's
get
going to
those.
be.
I'm sure you get those ones too, and we can start fasting as well. We can just give our
Mm,
life advice, a life advice.
yeah, I got a feeling this is going to be cut out by Simon in the edit, but that's okay.
No, no, no. He loves our life advice because he's a younger man and he needs guidance from older men like us who've who've
Mm,
lived life.
yeah, plenty of life being lived this week in the negotiations between the government, which haven't yielded a government at pixel time, as they say. No
Yeah.
government. In fact, we discovered this week on Monday that they hadn't even met. The three of them hadn't met in the same place since the election, which was
Does that sound to
a
you? Does that
month on the
sound to
day
you
ago.
like a suspiciously Winston tactic to play hard to
Yeah, he
get?
does. He does.
I mean,
He
I
does
don't
play
particularly
silly
want to
buggers.
find him, but he does play hard to get, doesn't he?
Yeah, and he doesn't have a lot of leverage, to be frank, and he's got to create some however he can. And extending the deadline, as we all know in negotiations, one way to exercise leverage is to refuse to do something until the last minute. And by delaying things, you effectively squeeze down on your opponent. And certainly, Christopher Luxon got a real hammering in the from the commentariat in this morning's media. And it's interesting that Tova O'Brien asked some pretty awkward questions of him earlier today about his experience in M&A. Because
He's going to
you
get it.
often
He's
hear
going
from.
to get quite a no. He's going to get quite a rude awakening, I think, to just how brutal some of this is actually in reality. Because he's trying to do this whole "I'm a CEO" thing, and I've done brilliant negotiations, but he hasn't really. When push comes to shove, he hasn't really.
When you look at the deal that was done in New Zealand, essentially it was cancelling a deal, actually. Air New Zealand had an alliance with Virgin and he shut it down. Now, that may well have been the right thing to do.
Is that his
But
big? Is that his greatest achievement?
as a CEO, yeah. He has done
Yeah.
deals with Unilever, but I mean, Unilever buying brands, I mean, they do that every second day. And it's what happens when you create a market, an FMCG brand. You wait to get acquired. And yeah, I'm not sure that they're the most complicated high
No,
stakes
exactly,
negotiations in the
exactly. Well, he can
business
wash
world.
out. He can wash his hands of Unilever. Yeah.
But that's a good one. So no deal as we speak, and this is becoming really awkward for the government because well we don't have a government.
Yes, exactly.
Christopher Luxon had hoped to go to the Pacific Islands Forum. He wasn't there. There was Caramel Brownlee instead, and it got awkward. And of course, APEC is starting today without Christopher Luxon. We have Damien O'Connor representing New
Yeah.
Zealand,
Who's
and
who? I'm sure Biden has just walked up to and said, "Damo, mate."
Damo, mate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go white baiting on the west
Yeah.
coast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Damo.
No, it's
Yeah.
it's it's been a rough week for Christopher Luxon, and he'd have to be hoping that by Sunday he's got something in the bag. Otherwise, this pressure suddenly he's gonna see how hard it
Yeah.
is, and
So, all
don't
right.
quite get it right.
Before we go to Catherine and get all gloomy about the environment as well, because there's not a hell of a lot to be positive about. But
Oh, I can be excited about the environment.
where would you put the chances of another election before the end of next year?
Incredibly low, because just the mere fact of having to go back to an election would immediately take at least 5 percentage points off National and everyone else, and there would be a real risk that New Zealand First, who are seen as holding everyone up, they're like the guy who doesn't arrive to get the party started. They
Yeah.
lose 1%, and that's enough to go below 5% threshold, and
Well,
it's
that's
all
all right, isn't
wrong.
it? Yeah.
Uh,
And then we get the actual
well,
coalition
if
of the coalition of green chaos, which actually might not be so chaotic.
Yeah, yeah, but that's not how Christopher Luxon will see it. So he will do everything he can to avoid that, and so I think will Winston Peters, because they
Well,
both have a lot to
when
lose.
Josie comes in and we get towards the end, I definitely want to talk this issue through with you, please, Bernard, about the Treaty of Waitangi, because I find
Yeah,
myself increasingly concerned, despite being a Pakeha and a deracinated New Zealander, when I hear David Seymour talking about this and Winston, it really concerns me that they're going to, try and turn the clock back 10 or 15, 20 years. And I think that's quite dangerous. Speaking of turning the
yeah.
clocks back, here's Catherine.
Oh, we're lucky to have Catherine on today. By the way, a great new innovation for the Kaka today. We've put out Catherine's first weekly climate roundup. It's been a big hit. Lots of people have been reading it. And for some of the things that we've talked about here, you can go and read a lot more detail and hear a little discussion that Catherine and I have had. One of the reasons that the lack of a government is a problem for the government is that it can't really respond when it's criticised or when people say something, and the opposition can't really get involved either. But what we're seeing now is, into the vacuum, people are starting to say interesting things, like a couple of the Pacific Island leaders at the Pacific Islands Forum coming out and calling on National to not restart exploration for oil and gas. Catherine, what did you make of that over the last week or so?
I mean, it's great to see a little pressure coming on from the Pacific region. There's actually a group of six Pacific nations that put out what was called the Port Vila call for a just transition to a fossil-free Pacific in March. And they were really hoping that the Pacific region could kind of spearhead a commitment to kind of a global phase out of coal, oil and gas. And so that was kind of what they went into the PIF with. And of course, it's been watered down in the statement that's come out from the Pacific Islands Forum itself because of New Zealand and Australia, of course. But yeah, I mean, this has always been a call from them to have, they want New Zealand and Australia to just be on their side, and and from the climate
And
point of view.
and from their and from their point of view, they actually now have some leverage, because suddenly Australia and New Zealand and the United States have woken up to the fact that the Pacific is a big part of this new great game between the big powers. China is very keen to get involved and help out, find some new friends, and the Pacific are going, hey, China's committing to reducing emissions. They're not mucking around. And by the way, they've got a lot of solar panels they're sending us for cheap. How about you actually do what you say you're going to do about phasing out emissions? And Australia in particular is quite vulnerable here. They're obviously a huge exporter of coal and oil and gas, an awful lot of LNG, and of course an awful lot of methane that comes out of that. It'll be interesting to see whether National follows through on this oil and gas promise.
That is exactly what we need to create, though, Bernard, as an export market for methane. We'd be tickety boo if we had that.
Oh yes,
I
if we
like
could
you. I
bottle
like
that,
your thinking there.
bottle
Well,
it,
there
and
kind of
put
is,
12
isn't
eggs on
there?
it. Yeah,
LNG. LNG
Yeah.
is
yeah,
basically methane, so there
yeah.
is an export
Methane.
market there.
Excellent.
You just
Good.
have to
Yeah,
be able to
I
bottle it.
like this kind of innovative thinking. You know.
yeah. Yeah, no, the pressure is on, and the longer the vacuum is there, the more pressure that there will go on. The second thing that I thought that was interesting this week, Catherine, was a paper that's come out from the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, Simon Upton, in which he has said that after some quite substantial research, new research by NIWA, it turns out there's an awful lot of carbon being held underwater on the seafloor in New Zealand's pretty massive economic zone.
EEZ, yeah.
Tell us about this paper.
Yeah, I got to say the PCE do some really great work, some good research, and on information like this. And this is one of them. It's really classic. NIWA did the research, and they were looking at carbon, what was stored in sediments of carbon in the sea, and they found a whole lot of it in New Zealand's EEZ, or exclusive economic zone, which is huge by anybody's standards. New Zealand's territorial waters. They said it represented something like 1% of global stocks of carbon, and this is the stuff that potentially could sit there for millions of years into the future as a storage, but it's at risk by human activities. And in particular, they were talking about bottom trawling, fishing.
Stirring it all up.
And this is something.
Yeah.
And this
I think one of the good
becomes a
things
really
from this.
interesting-
Sorry, one of the good things from this piece of research is if you can identify the really significant places where there's a lot of this carbon stored, then you can devise policy to be able to work around those, to make sure that they're not disturbed by seabed
undersea mining
and
and trawling. Yeah, what an interesting idea.
And it makes it even more important, therefore, that we protect that EEZ. There's an awful lot of trawlers that go in there without a lot of monitoring. Sometimes they turn off their beepers. China has a pretty awful track record in parts of the Pacific, strip mining, so to speak, our various fishing stocks.
Soon to be followed by literal
whole-
strip mining on the ocean floor. Yeah.
Well, that's the other thing. And certainly, I think avoiding the sort of seabed mining which has been talked about, and this will be a hot topic now for the new government because they're quite keen on this sort of thing.
There was something
particularly
I
off the
saw a
coast
couple of
of
weeks ago
Taranaki.
about a guy who was working with AI and robotics to invent this machine that would sort of float along above the sea floor and has little clippers, arms that would just go and pick up these
nodules.
potato-shaped nodules
Excellent.
off the ground
magnesium
without
nodules.
disturbing
What a
anything.
very good
Yeah.
idea.
I don't know how,
With a pair of
obviously there's a lot of
secateurs.
impact assessment to be done, but if
Yeah.
it can do what he's promising, it's actually pretty exciting and cool.
But you can imagine, I mean, their reference to mining and everything, you can imagine Waihi, you can imagine the Firth of Thames, conceivably even parts of Otago coming back to gold mining and various minerals. I don't really know what the geology is. Do you know, Catherine, about the geology of New Zealand from a rare earths point of view? I suspect that rare earths tend to come from much older geological places than New Zealand, but maybe
the
we do need
trench-
to dig
what is
up a
that
bit
big
more.
Kermadec Trench, I think, is
Yeah.
it's potentially a spot for that. But they actually found in this marine sediments study that NIWA did that the area around Fiordland in particular and the area in the Firth of Thames, around that area, are particularly significant areas for this carbon in the sediment.
really?
So
Interesting.
those would be areas that you'd actually want to protect. Yeah.
Yeah. Catherine,
Yeah,
there was
so
another
that-
story
this
this week
and-
that I wanted to ask you about because I found it quite intriguing because it sort of brings together, as you know, there's often a sort of weird conflation about pollution and climate change. And this was a study reported in The Guardian about microplastics being found in clouds, and which may be one of the reasons it's been detected at the highest possible altitudes in icy ice and mountains and so on, but that it's also that the presence of sufficient microplastics is creating a kind of aerosol which is leading to climatic change as well. Have there been any studies, as far as you know, about microplastics in New Zealand?
I don't know. I know that they've found microplastics like in the Antarctic and in all of these, they're literally everywhere. And there are, all sorts of concerns about what they do in terms of endocrine disruptors as well. Like they could be things that affect fertility, not just of humans, but all species. So yeah, a lot of concerns, but I hadn't heard that one about them being in the clouds and actually contributing to climate change. I mean, wow, that's, all of these things cross over, at some
Yes.
point when you
Yes.
start to do the research.
Yeah, well, the good thing is
But
that
there
we know
is-
Christopher Luxon does his recycling, so that's all right.
Yes, that's good. But there is some good news to end on in our climate segment with
Excellent.
Joe Biden and Xi Jinping meeting this week. I mean, it's great that they're meeting full stop and not firing things at each other. But secondly, they are making some agreements on the climate. And of course, China and the United States are the two biggest emitters. Catherine, what did we learn about how China and the United States might work together, at least on this?
Well, I mean, I think that's a really positive thing, at least about COP28, that it's actually forcing this kind of communication and cooperation that had been, put on the shelf for the last year or so. So that's a really good sign. And they're talking about a commitment to tripling global renewable energy capacity by 2030. So, and China is a leader in that. So, there is a lot to be gained there. I mean, it's probably, it could be a lot better, but that's a really positive sign. So,
yeah, no, it's been a good week on that front, and also with Xi Jinping and Joe Biden talking about reducing fentanyl supply from China, and also looking to maximize supply of solar panels and various other things. That's all aside from the matters of chip supply and rare earth supply and the competition that's going on there. But Catherine, lovely to have you on. Thank you very much for coming
Catherine,
on to the
lovely
show.
to see
And
you.
just a reminder
thank you.
for those people who are looking for a bit more, we have a weekly wrap up of the climate news that Catherine does, and we had a chat about that this morning. You can find that on the Kaka. That's gone out to all subscribers, both paying and non-paying. We're very proud to do it. Thank you, Catherine.
All right, see
Professor
you all next
Patman,
week.
there you are, you handsome devil.
Hello, how are you?
Very good, thank
Lovely
you.
to see
All
you,
the better,
Robert.
all the better for
Good to
seeing
see
you.
you.
And we're very lucky too to have Josie Pagani on with us, and fresh off the plane, perhaps from the Pacific Islands Forum. Is that right, Josie?
Yes, yeah, just got back a couple of days ago, and it was very week wandering around in the middle of the chaos of the biggest Pacific Island Forum ever.
Josie, I
Yeah,
was
I
really
did wonder
interested in
how
your presentation, your comment this week about treating the Pacific countries as partners and not beneficiaries. And I was immediately struck, of course, by the remark by Barry Soper's wife that they were, in fact, cockroaches. Was it cockroaches, Bernard? That the Pacific countries were
don't-
cockroaches?
She said
Leeches.
but to
I
be-
do apologise.
yes.
I got
To
the wrong.
be
Yeah.
fair to her, though, Peter, what she was talking about was that, and I think, if you look at the polling of New Zealand public, they don't feel that aid is very effective in the Pacific, and so therefore, they feel like it's a waste of money. So she was talking about it in the context of that. It was very.
Sorry, this is Heather Duplessis
words.
Allen. I just remembered it. Yep.
Heather Duplessis
So,
Allen,
so
yeah. It was
but you were making
bad
this
choice
point
of words.
about not seeing them as beneficiaries, Josie, which I thought was a really interesting perspective. Would you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, nobody talking about what the New Zealand public think about aid. The support for aid has dropped from about a high of 70% to roughly below 50%, and so that's not that New Zealanders are ungenerous. It's that they're looking at aid in the Pacific and going, what difference is it making? And so the point I was making about that was that no one wants to wean themselves off dependency on aid more than the Pacific. So you could double the amount of cynicism that New Zealanders might have about the effectiveness of our aid, and that would give you a good analysis of how the Pacific feel about it too.
Yeah.
So the point I was making was that there's we tend to think that the best ideas are going to come from us because we're development specialists, but actually the best ideas, and not just on economic development and how to lift people out of poverty in the Pacific, but also how to navigate some of the geopolitical competition that we're seeing at the moment. I mean, the Pacific, Rambuka, the Prime Minister of Fiji, I heard him say quite recently, we're really good at this. We've been doing this for many, many, many years. Just look at the Second World War. It's not the first time that we've been the focus of big geopolitical struggles. We've got some really good experience and ideas about how you navigate this. So that's more a partnership than thinking with this sort of slightly tilted head of compassion that we're here to help
absolutely.
the Pacific
No,
and
no,
they're
absolutely, yeah.
recipients of our largesse.
But
Yeah, I
Robert,
wonder.
are we recognizing this? Robert, is the Pacific being taken more genuinely being taken more seriously? I mean,
I think so, and I think I mean, very interesting what Joseph's got to say. It seems to me that many, and maybe Josie can react to this, because my sense is that many of the Pacific Island states do not buy into the paradigm of US-China rivalry determining the future of the region and the world. And it seems to me that they are determined not to be a pawn in the someone else's strategic game. They will certainly take advantage of the rivalry, and for many of them are microstates. And
Yeah.
it seems from their point of view, this rivalry may, in some sense, be welcome, because it means that the United States, Australia, and New Zealand largely had the show to themselves for much of the post-45 period. China's now competing in earnest, and this gives up new options. So it's a very interesting situation. And I mean, I think sometimes there is a tendency in Washington and perhaps Australia, and maybe in this country, to believe that our relationship with the Pacific is a bit of a one-way street. Whereas I know we discussed this before, but I think Pacific Island states jealously guard their state sovereignty, and also do expect reciprocity in terms of the relationships.
Yeah, there are two things that stood out to me. One was that the Pacific is, and I called it kind of crawling out from under other people's stories about it. So our story about the Pacific has been that, this is our backyard, and we look after the people in our backyard. Well, no one wants to live in the backyard, and they're going, we're not your backyard. We've got our own house, thank you very much. But then you've got China. The story that China tells about the Pacific is that it's trying to liberate. It's liberating the Pacific from Western colonization, rules-based system, and giving you autonomy back, because we're not colonizers, the other guys are. And then the US's story is, we're trying to protect you from Chinese aggression. So the Pacific's saying none of those stories are who we are. So you need to start listening to us. And one of the story that's coming out from the Pacific very loud and clear is that while these are very, very diverse countries, different languages, people look different, they've got different cultures, but they're saying, we know that together, because we're tiny states per population, together we're much stronger. So this idea of a Pacific Union, almost like you think about the European Union, we could be one of the biggest players in the world, actually, if we came together as a union. So the Pacific Island Forum is saying that regional voice is something you're going to have to take notice of, and start listening to us, stop telling us, who we are.
Josie, I wondered if this deal that was announced at the Pacific Island Forum by Australia with Tuvalu is some sort of model or opportunity to create a type of Schengen-style wider area of economic participation, trade, more free movement of people for all sorts of reasons. There's a lot of frustration, I think, in particular. Fiji has pointed out about the need for visas to travel to other places where the reciprocal is not the case for people in Australia and New Zealand to go to Fiji. So I wonder, is there room for some sort of Schengen style union?
Well, you think about how the EU started. I mean, it started with a deal over coal and steel, didn't it? And so if you remember PACER Plus, which was announced a couple of years ago, recounts has been completely ineffective. So it was meant to be, PACER Plus was a kind of development/trade deal that brought together, a number of Pacific countries, not all of them, and Australia and New Zealand, and it was going to help kind of create a trade block, if you like, but it would also have this $20 million development deal, which would help the Pacific build up its customs, its biosecurity, its regulations, and so on, so it could export to Australia and New Zealand more. it doesn't really appear to have had much of an impact at all. But I think, yeah, that you're absolutely right, Bernard. And Robert, you probably know more about this than me, but there's been this idea of the Pacific Union, like not like an EU model, it would be its own model, but this idea's been around for a long time. And maybe the sort of growing muscle of the Pacific Island Forum, this growing sense of their regional voice, maybe this is going to be the beginning of that conversation starting again. Really amazing to start thinking of the region. I mean, the barrier to it has always been whether New Zealand and Australia come into an EU type trade bloc, freedom of movement, freedom of capital, like Australia and New Zealand are going, just in realpolitik, what's in that for us? So that's the barrier. It's not so much the Pacific, I think, as Australia and New Zealand.
Robert, what's your reading of that?
Yeah, no,
You experienced a moment of silence on the podcast. None of us butted in. Excellent.
Steady on.
I think that actually, what Josie's saying is very interesting because it actually presents the likes of New Zealand and Australia with quite tough choices. They both, I think, in recent years have actually genuinely supported regionalism in the Pacific Island states. Indeed, the former Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, one of her strongest criticisms of the Chinese Solomon Islands deal, the base deal, was that it violated the terms of the Pacific Islands Forum, agreed back in, I think it was 1990, when members of the Pacific Island Forum should not actually put together security deals without consulting each other, or words to that effect. But what is interesting to me is whether, in fact, if these countries can achieve, if the Pacific Island states can achieve the level of cooperation amongst themselves that they clearly aspire to, or want to aspire to, that would mean we would either have to accept that and support it, or resist it. And I think on balance, I think New Zealand, I couldn't speak for Australia, but my sense is that New Zealand would probably believe that is actually worth accepting, because
there's no upside in resisting it, surely, Robert. There's no upside in resisting it.
Yes, precisely. And politics is often about tough choices. And it seems to me that on balance, New Zealand can live with regionalism in the Pacific Island states perhaps more comfortably than a state like China.
I do love a wonderful image, because these sorts of events in the Pacific are both very formal and hierarchical, but they also have a lovely sort of informality about it, because often the places are quite small. And so we're in Rarotonga and we're at Trader Jack's, which is where everybody goes, because it's Winston Peters has, I think, kept the business going over the years. So everybody turns up at Trader Jack's, and we're sitting there, and I'm Jerry Brownlee and the New Zealand delegation, and I was with the Tony Blair Institute, and we went there every night because it was nice food. And then one night we turn up, there's Albanese, the Prime Minister of Australia, with with his delegation, very casual, dressed in jeans and a Pacific shirt, and they're ordering a beer tower, which is sort of, and we're just looking at it going, that's just so Aussie, This is the Prime Minister and his delegation in Rarotonga, ordering a beer, having a great time drinking beer. Anyway,
Josie, what was the Tony Blair Foundation doing there, or were you them?
So I was with the guy who runs their Singapore office. So the Tony Blair Institute are reaching out to Pacific governments, and what they do is they do something that donors don't, which is that they work politically. They understand politics, so they'll work with a government and go, right, what are your political barriers? Who do you need to get things done? And their whole thing is to support governments that are doing good stuff to actually deliver. So I was there managing meetings with various prime ministers.
Interesting, thank you.
Yeah, no, one of the reasons I think the landscape has shifted under this idea of a more active economic and governmental union in the Pacific is the sheer need for labour. So both Australia and New Zealand are now running record high immigration policies. The fundamental problem of the last 2 or 3 years has been a lack of staff and also wage inflation because of that, which has spilled over into inflation more widely. And we've just had numbers this week showing 118,000 net migration into New Zealand. Australia is doing more than 500,000 a year at the moment. And one of the interesting things about that Tuvalu deal is that it sees up to 280 people from Tuvalu every year getting full access to Australia. So in a way similar to the deal that all New Zealanders got earlier this year, when the Australian government said, right, you can come in, you can have full access to our welfare system and our education system as long as you pay taxes. And I think the thing that shifted perhaps in the last couple of years, as well as the China competition, is the need by Australia and New Zealand to just need a lot more labour. And the ability for people to move back and forth freely, to send money home. I mean, a lot of the capital investment going into the Pacific is coming from people working in Australia and New Zealand, sending money home. The RSE scheme is being expanded in a bipartisan way here, and perhaps should be a lot
And in
wider.
Australia.
Yeah, and so I think that may be the opportunity. Now, how long it lasts, but right now we've got an aging population, and the core problem in the political economy, as much as the economy, is a lack of labour. And often it's labour that can just be thrown in to do the work. It's not necessarily, the highest skilled labour or the labour with the biggest number of letters behind names. It's we need people to do the work, and we're willing to pay Australian wages for it. Now, if
So
you're
here's a statistic. Sorry, Bernard. I was just thinking you were saying low skilled labour. I came across the other day that Tonga has the highest number of PhDs per head of population in the world.
really,
So, there's some highly qualified people in the Pacific. And that's the other point, I think, is that, there are political leaders, business leaders, there are civil society leaders who've been working internationally in these international forums representing the Pacific, for many, many years. And really, they can teach us a thing or two about. And one idea that I've been sort of touting and talking to people about is the idea of a Pacific Davos, if you like, but one that we hosted, in our part of the world, not about how do you fix the Pacific, but actually what is the Pacific's perspective, including us and including Australia.
It's a bloody
what
good
is our
idea.
perspective on the world's big wicked problems, from climate change
Can we all come?
to
Can we all come
Yes,
and get
well,
little booties to
bags?
get the snow?
yeah,
Little
little
bags and
bags.
little
But
booties.
actually, and on that note, one of the really interesting things that's happened this week, I think that might also change the landscape there, is this amazing paper, which you may not have heard about, that came out from NIWA, put out through the Parliamentary Commission for the Environment, looking at the carbon stored on the seafloor in the Pacific, in particular New Zealand's wider economic zone. Enormous amount, like 1% of all the world's carbon is stored in New Zealand's exclusive economic zone,
How?
which can be, it's stored on the seafloor. It basically
In the mud. It's in the mud, essentially.
it's in the
So
mud, and
but
the
Bernard's,
rock and
Bernard's
various other
suggesting
things.
that the Tony Blair Foundation fly their Learjets over and land in Queenstown for the New Zealand Davos, and I'd bloody love to be there. Thank you.
Maybe it's an electric canoe. I think we can make it. And but the thing is, the Pacific is going to be one of the places that stores that carbon, or more importantly, make sure it isn't disrupted
make sure it stays.
and lifted up. And that idea that the Pacific is also one of the solutions to the climate change issues as well as one of the victims is something I think that might get a run on. It's the first type of research that's done that.
Do you think, Bernard, that there's a growing awareness amongst the Pacific Island states that climate change is a life and death threat to them, obviously, and that may be another factor? We're talking about factors driving this new sense of regionalism. That may also be a fact, and they may also perceive they've got unusual leverage because, particularly in relation to New Zealand and Australia, because Australia and New Zealand have a big stake in the Pacific Island states getting on top of this problem, ameliorating the effects of climate change. And that may also be an interesting driver of this desire to, accelerate regional cooperation amongst the Pacific Island states. This new sense of leverage in relation to much bigger powers like Australia and New Zealand.
I think that's right, Robert, but there's also some, not pushback on that, but some desire for other powers, including us, to listen more closely to what the Pacific's saying. So they're saying, yes, climate change is an existential crisis for us, but they're also saying, but listen, in New Zealand, what is it that we need to deliver to our citizens for them to vote for us? I mean, that's where the politics come in. So it's like, that digital connectivity, that's the thing I hear all the time, that if they had better digital connection in the Pacific, in the outer islands, in some of these vulnerable areas, you would have better education digitally, better health, you can do online diagnosis, and you'd have access to other jobs. So Fiji's set up a massive call centre where they've created an alternative source of revenue, not just for people and families, but the country, compared to tourism. Because when COVID happened, no tourism. So
because the time zones are actually very good for that in many of those places.
Yeah. So there's a real need to be. I was with a Tongan friend of mine, and there was a prime minister. I think it was a former Tuvaluan prime minister. This is a while ago. Stood up, gave a speech about, the world needs to do more about climate change. And it was a really good speech, but with it, and she turns to me and she says, and everyone's asking why he's the ex-prime minister of Tuvalu, because he wasn't delivering on jobs, health, education, digital connectivity. So we've got to be really careful that we don't make the Pacific the only issue in the Pacific climate change, because their politicians are having to deal with all this other stuff too.
Yeah, development and so on. Robert and Josie, may I move the subject somewhat to Israel-Hamas? I did my spin-off thing this week and tried to bring up, because it's almost impossible to try to keep up, and sort of a fruitless task in a way, to try to keep up with which hospital is currently being bombed and how many have died so far. It just becomes a kind of death-elizer question. Do you see anything, Robert, coming in the news this week? We've had Blinken getting very firm about Israel not having control over Gaza for the future. Real concern coming from Biden, allegedly verbal concern at least coming from Biden about the number of civilian deaths. I wonder if we are about to see a ceasefire in the next couple of days. And I was also interested to see how, pathetic is the wrong word, but how modest the current weapons caches and various bits and pieces that have been found in the Al-Shifa hospital are, based on what the IDF has shown. It wasn't exactly a kind of warren of tunnels and a vast command center.
Yeah, some interesting developments you've identified there, Peter. It seems to me that there is a bit of a shift going on now amongst public opinion in the United States. The latest Reuters poll show that support for Israel in the current conflict in the Gaza has actually dropped to about 31%, which is quite low by American standards. And also, the support for a ceasefire has grown, according to this poll. So I'm wondering, there is also the frustrations that the Biden administration seems to be experiencing, although these were pretty predictable, actually. One is that, as you quite rightly say, the administration signaled to Netanyahu's government that they didn't want a military assault on Al-Shifa, the major hospital in Israel, in Gaza. And the second thing that the administration has signaled repeatedly is that they believe that it would be a strategic mistake for Israel to reoccupy Gaza. And on both counts, Mr. Netanyahu seems to be listening but not acting on American advice. And I get a sense that we've also we've had indications that the federal bureaucracy in the United States is getting quite impatient as well.
Yes, isn't that interesting? I mean, do you want to explain that? Because it was,
Blinken
had to
something like
essentially talk to the staff of the State Department and say, hang on a minute, calm down.
First of all, there was a memo within the State Department, wasn't there, which was authored by two senior Middle Eastern specialists, which basically critiqued Biden's approach to the whole problem quite severely. Said that it was undermining America's reputation in the world, and particularly America's support for the rules-based system. That is, the perception is the global South no longer takes America seriously when it talks about a need for a rules-based order. And secondly, they seem to be hinting that Mr. Netanyahu has he's very much his own agenda, and he's happy to accept American support. I think the thrust of the message was that for a superpower, it should not have its tail wagged, if you see what I mean, the tail wagging the dog. And I think that was one of the underlying points being made. There was also another expression of dissent, and that was that many staffers, I think something like 100 congressional staffers, had a symbolic demonstration of dissent. So there are signs of public opinion. There have been big protests as well, not just in the US, but also in the UK and other European countries. I think politicians in liberal democracies have to take note of this, and it does seem to be we're reaching a point. I'm not sure if a ceasefire is imminent, Peter. Another interesting thing is that the elders, this collection of global leaders, of which I think Helen Clark is a member, have also recently appealed for a sustained humanitarian truce or some sort of ceasefire because of the mounting deaths of innocent people.
And of course, in sheer volume terms, there's been some extraordinary and rather horrible analyses that people have to do this kind of work. But that the number of civilian deaths, and particularly death of children. I mean, it is a very young population in Gaza, but
it is
to other semi-equivalent conflicts. Although the thing is, you just don't get conflicts in that same level of super intense urban environments.
I mean, the problem with, when you call for a ceasefire, when we're calling for a ceasefire, unless the call is a ceasefire from Hamas as well, then, the problem you're going to have is that
well, it isn't a ceasefire if they don't.
Political, there's never going to be the political will amongst Israelis, even those that loathe Netanyahu and his government, who, by the way, will have their polling. That the popularity of Netanyahu and the government, it's dropped to an all-time
minus.
low. They will be gone after this war. So you've got to call it's got to be a call for Hamas, ceasefire from Hamas or humanitarian pause from Hamas. And then it's got to be, how the hell does Israel decapitate Hamas if there is a ceasefire beyond a humanitarian pause? You've got to answer that question, right?
Yeah, but I think the other argument against the ceasefire also has to be thrashed out a bit, because I've heard Hillary Clinton has written a piece in The Atlantic against a ceasefire, but that's based on the shaky assumption that there's a military solution to the threat of Hamas. And Hamas is a terrorist organization that's widely disliked, in fact hated by many Palestinians. They are quite, at the moment, I think Hamas is not losing any sleep over the fact that so many innocent Palestinians are dying as a result of the horrendous terrorist attack that they launched against Israel. From their point of view, things are working. But there's a wider interest here. Are we held hostage as a world by the fact that Mr. Netanyahu is continuing with a relentless military assault, which is killing lots of innocent people, and Hamas shows no signs of backing down? Do we just say, oh, well, we just have to wait till this played out? Do we just become armchair spectators to the mass slaughter and murder of innocent people? I think the answer is no. And also, we're not hearing from the Israeli government what is the next step when they conclude their military campaign against Hamas. Mr. Netanyahu's been a fierce critic. Many people forget this, but in 1999, he was in 2019, he was quoted as saying that Hamas could be a useful actor in denying the Palestinians statehood.
The authority.
It's been a bit of a tactical relationship, and that might explain why Netanyahu was caught cold by the Hamas attack. He may have thought he had everything under control with them.
Well, you're absolutely right, Robert. I mean, both Hamas and Netanyahu don't support a two-party state, so they suit each other. The end by the means. But I think, there's two things surely that we have to look at when you say, what does the world do? We can't be armchair spectators. It's got to come from Arab countries in the region, from Jordan to Egypt and beyond, about guaranteeing to the world that the ideology of Hamas and Hamas as an organization will be countered, if not destroyed. So
which requires Iran as well.
It's never going to happen, is it? That's the problem. And I mean, the problem.
Well,
about
interestingly,
Iran,
though, Josie, the former Iranian foreign minister came out this week and said, it warned Iran from stirring this up as well, which is pretty unusual.
the thing that really worries me, Robert, and I'm curious to know what you think about this. I mean, all of these things are connected, right? So you've got Iran, who's giving weapons to the Russians and supporting the Russians in their fight. You've got Iran, and Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas, where they're donkey deep in that. You've got North Korea sending weapons by train to Russia. And then you've got Russia hosting Hamas in Moscow, and at some point you think, are we looking at a small W world war? Like, are we starting to look at these regional
But we do, I mean, you're quite
connected?
right. There's plenty of actors taking full advantage upon grievances which centre on the denial of political self-determination for the Palestinians. And Hamas are very cynical. They don't seem to be losing any sleep about the number of people being killed by their actions or as a result of their actions. My concern is that the United States had a wonderful opportunity to drive the need for a Palestinian state after 9/11. Indeed, Mr. Bush made it one of his core objectives after 9/11, but that suddenly got lost. And I'm not hearing from the Israeli government at the moment what their plans are other than reoccupying Gaza. In other words, is Israel serious about acknowledging the Palestinian right to self-determination? I mean, this is a crucial issue. At the moment, we're talking about Gaza, but what about the West Bank? 200 people have been killed in the West Bank since the attacks on the 7th of October. Many of them were farmers. And look at the settlements in the West Bank. By the way, the Palestinian Authority has recognized the existence of Israel and has sought to cooperate with it. Is it being better treated? In short, Antonio Guterres had a point, although he was denounced by the Israeli ambassador to the UN,
come out of a vacuum.
that it didn't come out of a clear blue sky. The fact is, what is giving Hamas leverage is the frustration of many Palestinians and the way they're being treated under occupation.
So, should we not be saying something like, yes, if you're the US and Biden, and I hope this is happening behind the scenes, but you say, yes, we will support your right to self-defense after this hideous attack on October the 7th. And the quid pro quo of that is that you have to guarantee that there'll be no more settlements and that you will support the strengthening of PA, that you will not undermine it, you will support its growing strength as an alternative to Hamas. I mean, it should be these conditions, right, that are going.
I think so. I think most reasonable people think that, Joseph, including Americans. But it's very difficult to deliver. Every American president, apart from Mr. Trump, have protested against the illegal settlements. Every president since Clinton have protested against the illegal settlements by Israel in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, as well as the control of the Gaza Strip until 2005. But there's been little follow-through. The great leverage America has, of course, is financial. But I think it's very difficult, given the nature of American politics, for presidents to do more than give verbal expressions of their displeasure. They're very worried.
One thing, though, that Biden could do is make sure that Netanyahu's off the scene as quick as possible. He can't imagine there's that much support for him either in Israel or in the United States.
There isn't.
I just wanted to pivot back, still on Joe Biden, but this time meeting Xi Jinping in San Francisco. And we talked earlier in our climate section about some good news there. They're talking to each other, and there's been a couple of deals on the side. Josie, what did you make of the meeting between the two and what came out of it in substance?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I haven't followed the substance of it enough, but symbolically, it's really important that they've met. And this is, I mean, when you think of, our government, Luxon, not being represented at APEC at that level, I mean, these are the sorts of, if these talk fests are going to mean anything, it's often the sort of symbolism of who meets who and what the and behind the scenes, there's all this other stuff going on as well. So I think it was a pretty important image to see Xi Jinping and Biden together in the meeting, and coming to some sort of agreements. But I haven't followed the substance of it enough, actually. So I'm going to be uncharacteristically quiet.
I think it is an important meeting because I think China is signalling that it wants a really big upgrade in the relationship with the United States. And I think some cooler heads have prevailed in Beijing. A few years ago, they were talking about America being in inevitable decline. I think they realize that's not going to happen. And I think there's also been a fresh recognition in Beijing that the Chinese economy depends heavily on access to the American market, as well as the EU market. And I think there's a reckoning and a recognition that's gone on. It seems to have been a productive meeting. As we've said before in the Hoon, Biden and Xi Jinping have a long-standing relationship that goes back many years, and there seems to be actually some personal chemistry between them, or at least they like each other. And the meeting went on for 4 hours. The American side said there was real progress made, and as Josie indicated, progress on climate cooperation, which is welcome from two of the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases. But in addition, they've restored military-to-military relations. And China says it wants the United States to be a partner. And Xi Jinping said something quite interesting. He said the world is big enough, Earth is big enough for both China and the United States to prosper.
Which I didn't find
well.
particularly reassuring, actually, because I was thinking of the rest of us being completely bloody squeezed out by those two.
Pushed out to the side.
That made me feel profoundly It was that the world was big enough for two superpowers. It isn't small. It isn't big enough for tiny island states like us.
But one thing I would say is that even this year, beginning of this year, I remember having meetings with Americans visiting New Zealand, and they were reporting on this kind of war talk in DC, in Washington, where there was this sort of moral panic about we've got to prepare for war with China, we've got to. The fact that was really alarming to think that the US was in behind the scenes was sort of almost on a war footing, thinking we've got to be ready for this. So it's in that sense, I think it's also a really good sign from the American point of view that they're not in that same space, that headspace.
Do we think it's possible that she has thought, hang on a minute, Trump might be even more difficult?
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
I think
we're thinking about. Yeah, sorry, go, Robert.
No, I was just going to say I think that the Trump factor may be looming large here. They may want to build up Biden a little bit if they can, and show that under Biden's leadership the relationship's improving. But I think another factor here is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think there has always been elements within the Chinese Central Committee have not been happy about Xi Jinping's quite gung-ho support for Putin's invasion. And I think given the fact that this is a conflict that seems to be dragging on with appalling consequences all round, I think that the Chinese leadership may think to themselves, maybe it's better to go back to a much more productive and constructive relationship with the United States rather than trying to take opposite sides in a conflict like this. And I don't know. I just have a feeling there's been a bit of the pragmatic elements within the Chinese leadership have got the upper hand recently.
And that's one of the interesting things there, that the pressure is really on Xi to ensure stability in their economy, because in the last 6 to 9 months, there's been in a sense, not just an investment strike by foreign investors, but a consumption strike by China's own consumers. And suddenly, China is realizing that consumers are important in an economy. That's not how they normally do things. Normally, it's all about the investment. But when the consumers are nervous, when they see the bigwigs getting put in prison, when they can see that the foreign investment has dried up, it really calls into question this sort of social contract between people who have no democracy but have a growing economy. And when the economy is growing slowly, in part because of the tensions between China and its biggest customer, then you can see where Xi Jinping may be more keen on better relations. Although one of the interesting sidelines out of the last 2 or 3 days on China is that they have come up with a very detailed and hard plan on methane reduction. So one of the things that's come out in the last couple of days is that China says we care about methane. And from a New Zealand point of view, methane is a big issue for our agricultural sector. And if New Zealand is going to be continuing to send huge tons and hundreds of thousands of tons of milk powder, which essentially is a bagged form of burning coal and burping methane, then this will be an issue for China to watch out for.
Great segue from the world back to New Zealand.
Yeah,
Bernard.
We do,
And
yeah.
The coalition.
Yeah,
Not.
I'm not there yet. I just checked before, and it's still no government. Just finally, though, there is a government of sorts in the United Kingdom.
Jesus, Bernard. Yeah, this is stretching. You're stretching it. Yeah, go for the human dead cat. All right.
Good,
Yeah.
I've told Dad he can have a go at the skateboarding dog this week.
Yeah. I will put the link in the email newsletter, but I don't know if anyone saw Steve Bell, the well-known Guardian cartoonist, who he had a particularly pungent line in cartoons about David Cameron. He always got the sort of squeaky, rubbery face.
Well, he did him as a condom.
Yeah,
He did him with a condom pulled over his, just not to go a bit gross on you, but his metaphor was a condom pulled over the pasty-faced Etonian visage.
Can I tell you one quote of David Cameron's though that stood out to me about our coalition negotiations going on so long, and everyone's having a sort of panic about it. So he was talking about something else entirely, but I thought it was a really really good quote. He said, "Imagine in 1940 when Churchill made the historic decision to fight against Hitler. Now that decision, which is he called one of the finest decisions in British history, it actually took them 5 days of discussion to work out whether they were going to surrender or fight Hitler. And you saying, imagine if that was now, like every 5 minutes.
It's a different Winston. It's a different Winston, Josie.
Well, we'd have the head of comms coming in, knocking at the door, going, "Prime Minister, have we decided what we're doing? Are we fighting or surrendering?" And then you'd have someone leaking from inside the room, hashtag.
What does the focus group say about surrendering?
Going, "This is not going well. We're on day 3. It's terrible." We never would have decided to fight Hitler if we.
Jesus, Josie's interrupting your anecdote, Bernard. For God's sake, Josie's interrupting your anecdote. Go on, see if you can do it. I think this is going to be very tricky for you to do. Go on.
You shut up now, Peter. You're interrupting Bernard.
Yeah.
Someone has to. Jesus.
So it is. David Cameron is back. We never thought we'd see it. And Steve Bell of the condom cartoon has put out a picture of him with a David Cameron squeezy toy, which he'd had on his desk. He thought he didn't need it anymore, but he's brought it back and he's squeezing David Cameron again in a rubbery, squeaky sound.
Yeah, that's a disgusting image.
And only in Britain would they bring back someone who's not even an MP as foreign minister.
Yes,
the other thing. Unelected prime minister and someone
and an
who's
unelected
foreign
minister.
Yes,
I was just going to say we now have an unelected prime minister and an unelected foreign affairs minister.
Thank God for democracy in New Zealand and man called
Democracy is
Winston.
so overrated in the UK.
The empire strikes back.
See you two. You're both lovely. Thank you so much.
Lovely to see you all. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Ka kite
Have a good
anō,
weekend.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.